Welcome to another video. There's something inherently eerie about being alone in the woods. The isolation, the vastness, the unknown lurking between trees, it's the perfect backdrop for our most primal fears to manifest. Today I'm going to share some truly bone-chilling encounters that people have experienced while alone in the wilderness. These aren't urban legends or campfire tales. These are real experiences from real people who ventured into the woods and came back with stories that will make you think twice about your next hiking trip. Our first story comes from Alex, a 28-year-old avid hiker who had an experience in the Olympic National Forest in Washington state that he still can't explain to this day. Alex had been planning a 3-day solo backpacking trip for months. He was experienced, well-prepared, and familiar with wilderness survival. Nothing about this trip seemed unusual until the second night. "I'd hiked about 14 miles that day," Alex recounts. "I found a small clearing about half a mile off the main trail, set up my tent, and started a small cooking fire. It was early October, so the nights were getting chilly. After dinner, I put out the fire completely, got into my sleeping bag around 9 p.m., and quickly fell asleep. Around 2 a.m., Alex woke up to the sound of twigs snapping outside his tent. In the wilderness, this isn't unusual. Deer, raccoons, and other wildlife are active at night. But what followed sent chills down his spine. The footsteps were too deliberate, too heavy to be an animal. They were circling my tent slowly, methodically. I froze in my sleeping bag, hardly breathing. Then they stopped, right at the entrance to my tent. I could see the shadow of what looked like a person standing there, just waiting. Alex reached for his flashlight and pocket knife, the only defense he had. I called out, asking who was there, but got no response. The shadow didn't move. I unzipped the tent just a few inches and shined my light outside, but there was nothing there. No person, no animal, nothing that could have cast that shadow. Shaken but trying to rationalize the experience, Alex convinced himself it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. He tried to go back to sleep but couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Just before dawn, he heard the footsteps again, this time moving away from his tent and into the woods. When morning came, I packed up quickly and headed back toward the trail. That's when I saw them footprints. Human footprints circling my campsite, exactly where I'd heard the steps. But here's the thing that still haunts me. The footprints only went in one direction. They circled my tent and then went off into the woods. There were no prints coming into the campsite. It was as if whoever or whatever made those prints materialized out of thin air right at my campsite. Alex cut his trip short and hiked out that same day. He's still an avid backpacker, but admits he's never gone solo hiking since that night. Our next story takes us to the Appalachian Trail, where 34-year-old Megan had an encounter that defies logical explanation. Megan was an experienced trail runner who regularly spent time alone in the woods. In the spring of 2019, she was doing a training run on a section of the trail in Georgia that she knew well. "I started my run around 7 a.m., planning to do about 15 miles. The weather was perfect, cool, clear, with dappled sunlight filtering through the new spring leaves. I had been running for about an hour when I rounded a bend and saw an old cabin about 50 yards off the trail. Megan explains that she'd run this section of trail dozens of times, but had never noticed this cabin before. Curious, she decided to take a brief detour to check it out. It looked abandoned but not dilapidated, like someone had just walked away from it recently. The strangest thing was that there was no path leading to it, no indication that anyone had come or gone from this cabin in quite some time. Against her better judgment, Megan approached the cabin. The door was slightly ajar. She called out, but no one answered, so she gently pushed the door open and peered inside. The interior was sparse but neat. A small table with 2 chairs, a pot-bellied stove, a narrow bed with a quilt. But what stopped me in my tracks was the table. There were 2 steaming cups of tea on it. Steam was literally rising from both cups as if they'd just been poured. Megan backed out of the cabin immediately, a sense of dread washing over her. She ran back to the trail and continued her run, trying to shake off the unnerving experience. On her return journey a few hours later, she deliberately looked for the cabin. It was gone. Not hidden by trees or brush, completely gone. There was no cabin, no clearing, nothing. Just uninterrupted forest where I'd seen a structure with my own eyes just hours before. When Megan got home, she researched the area's history and discovered that a cabin had indeed once stood in that approximate location, built by a trapper in the 1880s who, according to local legend, disappeared without a trace during a harsh winter, leaving behind only 2 cups of tea on his table. Moving north to the dense forests of Maine, we have a story from James, a wildlife photographer who spent a week in a remote area capturing images of the local ecosystem. On his 3rd night, something happened that made him question everything he thought he knew about the natural world. I'd set up a small camp about 6 miles from the nearest access road, James explains. I had a tent, basic supplies, and my camera equipment. During the day, I'd hike to different locations to photograph birds, deer, and the occasional moose. The isolation was actually peaceful until that night. Around midnight, James was awakened by an unusual silence. Anyone who spent time in the woods knows they're never truly silent. There's always the rustle of leaves, the chirping of insects, the distant calls of nocturnal animals. But that night, the forest had fallen completely silent. It was the absence of sound that woke me up. I sat up in my tent, listening. Nothing. Not even the wind in the trees. It was as if the entire forest was holding its breath. James grabbed his flashlight and carefully unzipped his tent. The night was clear, with a full moon illuminating the forest. He scanned his surroundings but saw nothing unusual. Then he heard a soft, rhythmic thumping coming from somewhere beyond the trees surrounding his campsite. It sounded almost like a heartbeat, but amplified. Thump, 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 getting louder as if it was coming closer. I've encountered most of the wildlife you'd expect in Maine forests, and nothing makes a sound like that. James reluctantly stepped out of his tent, determined to identify the source of the sound. As he moved toward the edge of his campsite, the air around him became noticeably colder, dropping at least 20 degrees in a matter of seconds. The thumping stopped abruptly. Then I saw them lights, not flashlights or headlamps, but small, bluish orbs of light floating between the trees about 50 yards away. There were maybe a dozen of them, moving in a circular pattern. James, thinking they might be some kind of bioluminescent phenomenon, raised his camera to take a photo. The moment he did, all the lights abruptly vanished, and the forest sounds immediately returned: insects buzzing, leaves rustling, all the normal nocturnal chorus. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning I went to investigate the area where I'd seen the lights. The ground there was different. In a perfect circle about 15 feet in diameter, the forest floor was completely bare, no leaves, no twigs, no signs of life at all. Just bare, dry earth. The trees around the circle had what looked like burn marks on them, but only on the sides facing the circle. James packed up that day and left, but not before taking photos of the circle. When he got home and reviewed his footage from the night before, the frame where he'd attempted to photograph the lights showed nothing but static.